Okay, Baltic. Okay, so yesterday we learned about the different variations of Naziris and the length thereof, depending on the type of nusach that he used. So the first type of Naziris that the Mishnah discussed on Zayin Amud Aleph was the standard quintessential Jewish Naziris of kvetching. If someone says, Hareini Nazir Mikan Vatsoif Oilam, he doesn't really want anything more than a standard term of 30 days of Naziris. But he wants to be able to kvetch about it and say, oh, it was such a big deal. So that's the quintessential Jewish Naziris. That's the one mentioned in the Mishnah. Then came three other variations. We were familiar with the Naziris Oilam of Avshalom, where he's a Nazir forever, but from time to time he's allowed to trim his hair, and he brings 3 karbanos as he trims his hair. But we had two other variations. We had another variation of a recurring Naziris, which means it's an unlimited series of consecutive Naziris of 30 days. That type of Naziris, every 30 days, he completely shaves his head and brings the karbanos to discharge the Naziris. And then there was a third type of Naziris that we discussed, which is a Nazir le'olam, which means it's a fixed term. I'm going to be a Nazir for 1,000 years. That's one term of Naziris for 1,000 years. He cannot trim his hair, and there's no breaks at all. And the Gemara tells us when each of these 3 Naziris can apply. So if someone is picking a number that's unlimited, meaning it's not countable, like the granules of sand on the beach, that's how long my Nazir should be. So that clearly is someone who has no idea what he's referring to. So that means he's referring to a series of Nazirisin of 30 days, but an unlimited series. So therefore, in that case, if someone said Areinu Lai Kesei Roshi or Kechayil Hayom, that would net a series of Nazirisin, which means every 30 days he goes through the process of terminating his Naziris. But if someone gave a fixed amount, such as 1,000 years, so 1,000 years, he knows exactly what it is. It might be a very long time, but he knows exactly what it is. That's a regular Naziris that lasts forever, which means he's never allowed to take a break in between. He can't trim, he can't shave. It's just a solid Naziris. But then there was a third kind, which is also an unlimited number in which he cannot fathom how much it is, but it's not multiple Nazirishin like the hairs of my head or like the granules of sand. Rather, it's kemikan v'atzoifa oilam. If he says something like that, then that means that he only wants one big Naziris, and that would be the Naziris of Shalom, which means he's a Nazir oilam, and every time to time, depending on the 3 machlokes that we had, he would be able to trim his hair and then bring karbanos. It is, but one you know exactly how many years it is, like 1,000, and one you don't. Right. So the Chazal tell us that what someone means when he says 1,000 years, he means one full Naziris. Yet when someone picks out a number or picks out a comparison to something that it can't count, they can't fathom, that means another oil like Avshalom. So it Chazal telling us what he means is hard for us to. No, the result is not the same, because if he said I should be a Nazir for an unlimited amount of time that he has no right, but he doesn't know when that is. It is one Nazir, but it's considered like a Nazir oilam, and therefore he's allowed to lighten up from time to time. That's the practical difference halacha. There's a lot of trim from time to time. But if it's a fixed term, then he cannot trim until the end of the term, no matter how long that term is. So that's that. Those are the 3 Nazirishin we learned about yesterday, and there's going to be some of it coming to visit us or to accompany us in Daf Ches today. Okay. Then we had the Mishnah of analyzing his words. If you hear any Nazir, v'yoy mechad, that's 2 Nazirishin. And if he said Harei Nazir Shloishim Yoim V'Shoachas or V'Yoim Echad, that just means one Naziris of 31 days. And then the Gemara introduced us to Rabbi Kiva, who said that you analyze someone's words, and if someone uses extra words, we actually read into it, and we say that he meant something specific. Thank you so much, Mark. For instance, if someone said Hareni la Naziris Shloishim Yoim V'Yoim Echad, so he sticks in one extra word of V'Yoim, you read into it, just like Rabbi Kiva said, that although when a person normally sells a property, he does not include for himself a right of access to those items that he retained for himself, but if he speaks out, chutz me'elu, the fact that he mentioned chutz me'elu, which he didn't need to mention, is actually him expressing that he wants to retain for himself a right of access. Because the Kiva says you measure everyone's words carefully, and if someone uses an extra word, there's definitely meaning to it and something to be learned from it. Which takes us to today's Mishnah, which we already learned thoroughly because it was quoted yesterday several times. So it's a little bit of a chazara. Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Hareni Nazir Kesai Roishi, which is the Gemara quoted yesterday, which we just reviewed. Hareni Nazir Kesai Roishi, Ucha'afar Haaretz, Ukechayla Yom. So these were things that are uncountable. There's so many of them. So the halacha is Harei Zeh Nazir Olam, and we look at it like it's a series of consecutive periods of Naziris of 30 days, and therefore Umagaleach Achas L'Shloishim Yom. Every 30 days he takes a haircut and he terminates his Naziris, and he immediately restarts a new set of Naziris. That's what we quoted. Here in the Mishnah, the Gemara quotes a dissenting opinion. Rabbi Yomer, that's not how this works. This is not an unlimited series of consecutive Naziris. Rather, it's one long Naziris. It's one long Naziris. And he just meant that he wanted to keep a Naziris that would be as long as many days as the amount of hairs that he has, which really goes on forever. However, when do we say someone means a series of 30-day periods? That's ha'omer alai nizirois. He specifically says, I want multiple nizirois. Hareni Nazir is a Kabbalah of one Naziris. But Harei alai nizirois, there he's asking for a series of nizirois, kisayroishi, uchafar aretz, ukachoil hayom. Okay, that's halacha number one. And like the Iran says, Rabbi Omer Einzim Megaleach Achat L'Shloshim Vayde Kamer Kesai Roshi, he didn't mean multiple Naziris, rather Chado Naziris Aricha Kibul Alav Kishir Sar Roshi. But Ve'enu Yachal Lashlim, he'll never be able to finish it. Ve'enu Megaleach Li'od, and he will never take a haircut. So Rabbi learns that this Naziris is like someone who's had 1,000 years. Okay, that's the first halacha. Next halacha, Hareni Nazir Malay Habayis. I should be a Nazir for a full house, Oy Malay Hakupa, or a full basket. So he has a big empty house here, or he has a big box in front of him, as Tosfos speaks out, and he says, I want Naziris for this whole box, for this whole house. So what does he mean? Zok the Mishnah Boitkinoi. So you actually have to probe him to understand what he meant. Im Amar Achas Gedoyla Nazarti. If he meant one big Naziris, that he's a Nazir Lamajoim, because then it means, like we learned in the Mishnah on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, that it's the quintessential Jewish Naziris. I want to stand in Naziris, but I want to kvetch about it forever. But Vim Omar Stam Nazarti, but if he wrote that no, I meant what my words say, which are multiple Naziris, then Roin is Akuba Ki'ilu Himalaya Chardol V'Nazir Kol Yamav. You look as if it's full of chayil and he's a nazir for the rest of the days. And everybody knows the famous story with a woman that was caught shoplifting. And she was in court and she was found to be guilty. And when the judge was going to issue the sentence, the judge asked, what did you steal? So she said, I stole a can of canned peaches. That's what I stole. So the judge says, well, if that's the case, you're going to go to jail for 3 days because there's 3 peaches in the can. And her husband pipes up and says, no, Your Honor, it was a can of peas. So here it says, you look at this kupa, not like it's full of peaches, rather like it's full of mustard seeds, which are tiny. And therefore, the Nazir kol yamav. So let's see what the Yosy says on this. Vim Amar Stam Nadarti, Roina Kupa, Ki'ilu Malaya Chardel, V'Nazir Kol Yamav, L'Rabbanan. It's good according to the Rabbanan Del that it's Naziris, Ach Naziris, with a Rebbe, it would be one long Naziris. Because once again, he didn't say Hareni Nazirois, Harei Alai Nazirois, he said Hareni Nazir. So this is subject to the same machloikis between Rebbe and the Chachamim. According to Rebbe, it's one long Naziris, and according to the Chachamim, it's a series of 30-day Naziris. Zok Heilige Shtavaitu. Hareni Nazir mikan vad mokim ploini. What if someone says, I'm a Nazir from here until mokim ploini? Once again, we also had this yesterday. Oimdin kama yomim mikan ad mokim ploini. You see how many days it takes to get from here to mokim ploini. In pachas milamed yoim, if it's less than 30 days, the Nazir lamed yoim, because that's the minimum. Vimlav Nazir Kaminian Hayamim. Let's see the Heligarat. Toisvis, Mikan vad mokim ploini pachas milamed yoim Nazir shloshim yoim. Midi dehava a'omer hareni Nazir yom echad. If you said I'm a Nazir for 1 day, it's automatically dav Nazir lamed yoim. V'imlav Nazir Kaminian Hayamim uchadefrish l'il the Marika shehichsuk v'der. Once again, the Gemara asked there, how do you know it doesn't mean just kvetching rights when he said from Mikan ad mokim ploini? So the Gemara answered, speaking where he was already on the way. So we said that he was already on the way. He already mentioned the Pshai of Moshe. He already mentioned all the Talmud of Hashem and gave her Bible nest, but he was still nervous about his trip. So he said, I'm a Nazir for the duration of my trip. And that's why he's only a Nazir for that duration. There's actually a Shaila, which is relevant nowadays, is when you say for the duration of the trip, Mikan vad mokim ploini, well, if you walk there, it's a lot longer of a Naziris than if you drive. So there's actually a Shaila in the Chayna about it, and it's relevant because we know that if you're traveling and you have to wash, you have to go travel up to a mill. And the same thing, if you have to find a minion, you have to travel. So the question is that a mill, meaning if you walked, that means you have to even go a couple of hours out of your way, or does it only mean 10 or 15 minutes out of your way? If I'm not mistaken, I think Rabbi Lowy Paskins, you look at a mill as how long it takes to drive it. So I think it took about 20 minutes out of your way is what the rules, 18 minutes? Yeah. That's definitely, I mean, how long does it take to walk a mill? Forward. Backwards, even less? How long does it take to walk a mill? I think does it take 18 minutes to walk a mill? So the Rabbi walking.
15 to 18 minutes.
To walk a mill.
Takes walking at a brisk pace is about 10 minutes a kilometer.
So if that's the case, then the Rav based it on walking, not on driving. Sorry? Oh, I don't know. I don't know the exact. I'm just focusing on how you travel that. The halacha, I have no idea. Okay. Zok to Gemara Vayter. Basically, it's very. But me, the halacha is very simple. If I'm traveling by myself, there's no stopping, no getting nothing doing. If I'm traveling with my sons, I would have to drive around the world and schedule my whole trip around it, so that I'm only at. It's not just that I have to schedule my whole trip around being at different shuls during different types of way. I learned a whole new method of planning a trip after my sons became yeshiva. That's why I don't travel so much anymore. Zok to Gemara. Hareni Nazir Kaminyan Yemoisha Chama. What if someone says, what if I'm a Nazir Kaminyan Yemoisha Chama? There's actually a whole shaila if it's 354 or 365. If we're showing them here, I'll say 365. Hareni Nazir Kaminyan Yemoisha Chama. Moyin Nazirois Kaminyan Yemoisha Chama. Once again, you count individual Naziris, individual sets of 30 days, Kaminyan Yemoisha Chama. I don't think it's a problem. It's Kaminyan Yemoisha Chama, like the days of a solar year. So even if we have Ibrahim, that's because we have to make up for time. I'm sorry? Well, it's days. I guess it's days. But here it's not even days. I think here we're learning that it's full Nazirism. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Adasheni he cannot be a Nazir because you have to drink wine. So that's the month he asked him early now. So Zok to Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Ma'isa Haya, there was actually a story like this. Kivin Shehishlim, what is 365? Because that's Moshe Chama times 30. 365 times 30 is approximately, so it's about 30 years. It works out to about 30 years, which makes sense because it's 365 times 30, right? So it's very simple. So it's a 30-year ordeal. So there was a story that Rabbi Yehuda said over it to prove the point of the Chachamim that a person actually was a Nazir for 30 years because of this Kabbalah, and right after Kivin Shish L'meis, right after he finished, he died. So it's not something to say, he finally got free and now he died. I think the Mepharshim bring down, Vais Achois, his Kedusha of Naziris was what was keeping him alive. And once he didn't have the schus anymore of being a Nazir, he died right away. Well, 30 times 365 is 30 years. Yeah. Okay, so let's see what the Tosfos says. Communion Yemois Hashana, Moyin Naziris, Communion Yemois Hashana, Dainu Shin Samach Hei Chadashim. It's 365 months. Yeh Nazir, he will be a Nazir. Naziris Acher Naziris. Umekaleich Beintayim. Yeah, it's a big mortgage with interest rising. Yeah, Umekaleich Beintayim, and in between each Naziris, he'll do the full process of discharging Naziris, taking a haircut or maybe carbon. Even the Kamar Keminyan Mashma Nazirais V'loy Naziris Arach. It's Mashma multiple Nazirais and not one Naziris. Rabbi Yehuda Ma'isahaya V'chivin Shesh L'meis. Rabbi Yehuda L'siyui L'Tanakama Kasi. Rabbi Yehuda clearly is trying to bring a raya to the Tanakama. The Kamar Ma'isahaya V'chayvu Chachamim Nazirais Harbe V'chivin Shesh L'm Kulei Meis. V'chivin Shesh L'm Kulei Kama Meis. So I do want to drill down here because this will become relevant a little bit later today. So let's think about this. This already knows the community Mosachama, Moed Naziris, you carry multiple series of 30 days. So this pashtus is going to be taloi in the machlokes, Rabbi and the Chum that we said. Because according to Rabbi, unless you say Harei Alai Nazirois, it's one long Naziris. And it's only according to the Chachamim who says Harei Nazir community Mosachama, like a Sai Roshi, that it's multiple sets of 30 days. So that's one important thing to note. However, there is a little bit of a difference. So let's look. If we look back to the Mishnah, Hareini Nazir Kasai Roshi, the Chachamim held that that's multiple Naziris, and Rebbe holds it's not multiple Naziris. What did Rebbe say? You need to say in order to indicate that you want multiple Naziris is Harei Alai Nazirois. But this is a little bit in between. He said, Hareini Nazir Kiminyan Yimoisachama. So does the word Kiminyan make a difference? So from the Rishonim, you see clearly here that Rabbi Yehuda was bringing a raya to the Chachamim, which means from the Tosfos you see that the Tosfos holds that even if you use the word minyan, that wouldn't change the opinion of Rabbi. Rabbi would still hold, even if you use the word dominion, even if you use the word kiminyan, it will still be one big Naziris. It's not multiple Naziris. Because as Tosfos explains, Rabbi Yehuda was bringing a raya to the Chachamim that it's multiple series of Naziris and not one big Naziris. So that means Rabbi must hold over here that it would be one big Naziris even if you use the word communion. Does that make sense? That's the sheet of the Chachamim that Rebbe argues. Right, so the question is, what does he mean to say? Does he mean to say he wants multiple Naziris, or does it mean to say he wants one long Naziris? Or it could mean the amount of time that it would take to do 365 series of Nazirs. But it's one long Nazirs. No. It's because he didn't say Haredi Nazir Kimoy Shachama, Kimini Yimoy Shachama, which means I'm not talking about the amount of days that I want. I'm talking the amount of Naziris that I want. But the question is do I want one big Naziris? So 30 times, or is it individual Naziris? So Rebbe seems to default that it's one long Naziris, but it's calculated by multiplying each Yomai Shachama by 30 days, and the Chachamim hold it's a series of independent Naziris. I just want to point out that the communion is not the word that Rebbe used, nor is it the word that the Tanakama used. So it's somewhere in the middle, and we're going to see that communion is somewhere in the middle, and the Gemara is going to elaborate on that. We don't always say that. Sometimes when it's not clear, we actually have to ask him. If Chazal knows with certainty what he meant, do we say this is what it means? But often, that's what it means sometimes. Yeah, that's right. That's how it works. It depends on the clarity of his words. Even in our Mishnah itself, our Mishnah says, in some cases, the Mishnah says clearly what the psak is, but in one case it says boit kenoisa. So whenever they say boit kenoisa, it's because his words aren't clear. So let's see the head of the Gemara. Roinis hakupa ki ilu malay chaydo v'nozer koyamba. Frag the Gemara, who said it's peas? Maybe it's peaches. V'amai v'lechazia ki ilu malay kishu nedeluyin. B'tavla tekanta. Why do you say he's a nozer for 30 years? If it's full of kishun or deluin, well, then he has a much shorter period of time that he's dealing with. Well, so let's say it's big ones. So let's see Toshis. V'lechazia ki'ilu himalaya kishun v'deluin b'tavla tekanta. Amas nisin kaparach. The Gemara is asking a kash on the Mishnah. The Gemara says roin ki'ilu himalaya chagol bein leit takana. Because of that, he has a naziris for 30 years. Uadin the Machilamifrach, the command the Mali Botzek. If it was full of dough, then it's only one. Why? What? So the lesser command the Mali Botzek. Maybe he only meant one Naziris. But Nekol Alei, and he should only have to keep one 30-day Naziris. So that's all that we're going to discuss. That's going to come very much into play. That comes very much into play. So that's the Gemara's kasha. Amar Chizkiya, in fact, b'machloika shenuya, this halacha that our Mishnah says b'pashtus is in fact a subject of a machlokes, like Chaim just brought up, as to would a person be makel on himself, or would it be machmer on himself? Reb Shimoni, in our Gemara, our Mishnah holds like Reb Shimon, who holds a person's machmer on himself. The Omar Adam Machlis is Atzmoi Lidovar Shesvekei Chavar Mivadoi. Reb Shimon holds that here we have a suffix if it's chardal or if it's diluin. Now, even if it's chardal, it's not as bad as if it's a suffix. When it's a suffix, it's even worse than chardal. Because if it's chardal, you know clearly what to do. For the next 30 years, every 30 days, you recharge your naziris. But if it's a suffix, we're going to see Tosfos, that makes you stuck and you could never get out of it. So if Shimon holds, a person will do something like that, even though the fact that his lashon isn't clear places him into a suffix that's going to really mess him up. And that's what our Mishnah must hold like. The Tanya, Hareini Nazir. So before we learn this example, actually we'll learn this example, then we'll do Tosfos inside. The Tanya, Hareini Nazir Almanash Shehei B'Krize Meyakur. We all remember in the department stores, there would be a jar of jelly beans, and if you could guess how many jelly beans were in there, you won some type of prize. I don't know if they ever awarded a prize. I never saw that they had a picture with the prize winner holding this check. I never saw that. I think they're giving out the same prize that Publishers Clearinghouse gave out. So it says over here, Hareini Nazir Almanas Sheyehei B'Krize Meyakur. If there's 100 kur in this tree, then I want to be a nazir. And then he came to count. When they came to do the counting, when someone came to count, they saw that someone put their hand in the jelly bean jar. Someone stuck their hand in the cookie jar and there's no cookies left. Or all went missing. So what is the Allah? Rab Shimon holds that he remains Asr ben Naziris, Sheshavik Naziris Lahachmer. And we're going to get into the details of why they say they're Piskei Halacha. So let's have a look back in the Ran. Zok the Ran, I'm sorry. Zok Toisus, Ulakach Porach. So I'm on the second wide line in Toisus. Ulakach Porach, Luchumram in Mashmois Lushan. Aval Hocha Kasol Kadaitach, the in Adam Machlis Atzmoy Ledovar, the Sveke Chamer Mivadoi. Here, if you have a suffix, whether or not it means Chardal or Deluin, that suffix is even more Chamer than if you knew for sure it was Chardal. Shayidei suffix Yi Chamer Loi Me'ilu Kibu Ilalav Naziris Vadai. This suffix here in his words now creates a greater Chamer than if he would have been sure to have said Chardal. Kamoi, She'im Bevir L'Chardal Nischafen, if we know for sure he meant Chardal, Moinin Naziris Achan Naziris, La'olam. Umegaleach ben kolachas va'achas maybe carbon. That's what he would do. However, v'hashda the ikal svuke the lekishuin or lebotek nischaven. But now that we have to be concerned that he maybe meant kitun or botek, which is one big naziris, and we know that if he meant lekishuin, there's a huge difference between kishuin and chardal. Chardal is unlimited because I can't count it. Kishuin you'd be able to count. So that, by definition, would make it into one term of Naziris versus multiple terms of Naziris. So therefore, once he does the first Giluach after 30 days, Shuv lo yochel achiyavi carbon. He cannot do another Giluach and another process of, if he said Badei Chardal, every 30 days he would do the process. But here he can't do the second process. You know why? Because it's a suffix of Chun Lazara. Because it might only be one Naziris. The carbon in Yachalavi, the Shemal Levatik Nischaven, Lachad Naziris, the Kamasi Chum Bazar. So he's stuck. So therefore, Reb Shimon holds, even if a person is going to be stuck, he'll still put himself into a suffix. Rabbi Yehuda holds, let me finish. Rabbi Yehuda holds, a person doesn't want to put himself into a matzav where he might bring Chum Lazara, he for sure has kavana for the more Kula Dikatzat.
When I have to know, I have to know then I have to
let's see the next places. Shehei b'kriza meyakur umota shenignav ve'ein anu yoidin im hayu boy meyakur imlav. So Reb Shimon Oiser the Shavak Naziris lahachmer. Why? The chashinon dilma hayu boy meyakur. Maybe there was 100 kur and therefore he's a nazir. L'kamon mifarish takanta Reb Shimon. L'maisa, even though he's stuck over here, there's actually a way out. And the way out would be he made this Kabbalah. We don't know if he's a Nazir or not. So that puts him to a big problem because he can't bring Karbanis to discharge his Naziris. So what do you do? What he does is the Aimer Kaidim Sheyas Chalimno Shemei Nazirusai. Before he starts counting the Naziris, that's really a suffix because he doesn't know if there was Meyakur or not. He says as follows. Im hayu by meyakur, if in fact there were 100 kur, Bahraini Nazir, Midiburi Harishon, and I'm a Nazir because of my first Kabbalah, because there's in fact 100 kur here, then Hine Ashlim, Nidarai, maybe Karbonaisa. So then I'm a perfectly legitimate Nazir, and it's not Chul Nazar. But on the tzad that I'm not a Nazir from the original Kabbalah, therefore, I'm not really a Nazir now. Well, on that side, now he's a Nazir. Either he's a Nazir because of his first Kabbalah, or he's a Nazir because of his second Kabbalah. And therefore, so now he has a way out. No, it's the same thing because he keeps one set of 30 days. He says if the Kabbalah that I made 2 minutes ago was a Kabbalah, then I'm making another Kabbalah. But if the Kabbalah that I made 2 minutes ago is not a Kabbalah, so I'm making a Kabbalah now. And now we get started. So he's being a Nazir for 30 days. We just don't know if he's fulfilling what he said in his first comment or if he's fulfilling what he said in his second comment. It's a conditional Naziris. It's exactly what it is. Yeah, that's right. You right after. So what you're thinking is what the Tosfos is about to discuss. I understand, but you don't even have to wait 30 days to have trouble. So Zokt Tosfos in Taimar, so my Sveika Cham Mivadai. We were trying to say it's Sveika Cham Mivadai. That's how Rabbi Yehuda's Mekel. Why is there a problem? Rabbi Yehuda can use this too. So why does Rabbi Yehuda say he's not a Nazir? My Sveika Cham Mivadai. Hareu Nifta ben Nazir Sachas uve Karban Echad. Kilu Bevadai Hayiboy Meyakur. Because of this solution that the Tosfos shared with us. Yesh Loimar. No, you can have problems. What if he became Tameh before he made it Nai? Now he can't be Makabal another Naziris because he might be the Suffolk Nazir Tameh. The Hashdab is Suffolk Nazir Tameh, he can't do anything now. He can't bring an Asham Tameh, which is normally what a Nazir who becomes Tameh brings, because maybe Shalom Hayyab Meyakur, Bekamai Shachun Lazar. But it'll still be Asher B'Yainu with the Achs Lo'ilam. He'll be Asher Lo'ilam because he never discharged his Naziris. The Shemin Nazirhu, V'niyachal Lifter Min Zirusai, Im Loi Ba'avois Asham Toma. The only way for another Tomei to discharge his Naziris is to bring the Asham Tomei and then start over again and then finish. But he got stuck. It's like a timer has to get to the end and the timer motor broke in the middle, right? The lights are supposed to turn at 5 a.m. and the timer motor breaks. 5 a.m. never arrives. You can never bring an Asham al Atznai. Aval nitma achar shehisne, then there's no problem. Oz have a vadai Nazir Tamei umaisi Asham Tumah vadam Asham Zusa. Rabbi Yehuda's matter shesavik Nazir's lachol. The hula kibul alav elam can yimtza boy meyakur. He would never be mekabel upon himself such a thing unless there's meyakur. The chayva masnizin roy nois hakilu malaya batzek the yifter b'nazir's achas. It will partner with one of the zeros. So Chaim is asking, what do you mean you don't know? Ask him. There's a machloikis what the stam das of a person is. When someone says these scary types of naziris that are very unclear, is he bold enough to venture into dangerous territory like Reb Shimon holds, or is he a conservative and he doesn't take chances, and therefore he definitely didn't mean to be Makabal Naziris under such a circumstance, and therefore it would be potter. So that's the Shaila. So the Gemara wants to say, it seems like our Mishnah who says that when someone says Malaya, Achavas Malaya, he means Chardal, it doesn't mean to say he means only Chardal, because if it's only Chardal, it's also clear what he has to do. It means it could even mean Chardal, but it has to be Machmer to both chumras, which means he'll be stuck and he'll never be able to get out of his naziris, even after 30 years. So Zok Gemara, it has to be going according to Reb Shimon. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lav Davka, Afilu Tema Rabbi Yehuda, even if you want to say that our Mishnah is consistent with Rabbi Yehuda, here Rabbi Yehuda would agree. You know why? What does Rabbi Yehuda say? A person will not get into a naziris if it leads to suffix. Here, it's not a question of if he went into the Naziris. He surely went into the Naziris. It's either Naziris of the Lewin of Botzek or of Chaydel. But he for sure started, the question is, did he accept upon himself the next one and the next one and the next one? Where it's only a question of how to end the Naziris. So then, am I loy? Why would you say that? Why would you say that Rabbi Yehuda would disagree in this case as well? Because in this case as well, it's the same shaila. Lechse lekupa ki ilu melei keshuin udaluin is to havalet the kanto. Once again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the second naziris is weiter a question of was he makabel upon himself a second naziris or not? Right? If it was deluin, then it was one long naziris. If it was chardol, it's multiple naziris. And don't we have that same rule that Rabbi Yehuda holds when you're talking about being the kabel and naziris? There, Rabbi Yehuda holds you go to kula. There's a havel at the kanto. So basically, what the Gemara is saying is you can't say Rabbi Yochanan that Rabbi Yehuda would agree here because this is a question of how to discharge the naziris. Because when you really break it down, the question is is he being makabel upon himself a second, a third, a fourth, and a fifth Naziris? Because if it's chadol, there's many Kabbalahs of Naziris. But if it's Deluin, it's only one Kabbalah. So you cannot tell me it's a question of discharging, and there Rabbi Yehuda would be machmer. It's also a question of, is he being makabel of the Naziris? Zok to Gemara, all this is based on the fact, so Kadaita Naziris who the Kabul Iluya, here we're basing it all on the fact of whether or not Rabbi Yehuda holds that this would be a new Kabbalah's Naziris, and we're saying it would be, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda would also be makel over here as well. Why? The Rabbi Yehuda Sabarla Karebi. Maybe we could say Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rebbe. The Tanan Rebbe Omer, what did Rebbe say? Even if it's chardal, right? Even by Saroishi, Rebbe said he's not megalayach achas l'shloshim yom. Ve'elu shemegalayach achas l'shloshim yom. That's only ha'omer harei alai naziros. If someone makes it very clear he wants multiple naziros, so if you're going to say that Rabbi Yehuda learns like Rebbe, so then it's the same shaila again. It's no longer a question was he mekabel upon himself multiple naziros, because he surely wasn't according to Rebbe. According to Rebbe, the question merely is how long his naziros is going to last, and if he's going to get out of it. And there, even Rabbi Yehuda would hold that you could be machmer, because again, Rabbi Yehuda only says you're mekel if it's a question of him being mekabel naziros. But if it's a question of when the naziros becomes discharged, when it ends, there Rabbi Yehuda would be moeded. So therefore, we're back to saying Rabbi Yehuda could be moeded to our Mishnah if Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rebbe. So if Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rebbe, that it's not a series of multiple naziris, even when you set the chagol, it just means one very long naziris, well then you can say that our Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Yehuda as well. But that's only based on the premise that you can say Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rebbe. Correct the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda misava like a Rebbe. Can you make such an argument? Because if you hold like Rebbe, then regardless whether he meant the chagol or whether he meant Keduluin, it's one long naziris. That's true, but Rabbi Yehuda holds the only time a person doesn't get into a suffix is when he's being the Kabbalah Naziris. But he will get into a suffix of how the Naziris will end. So if they're both one Naziris, whether it's Chadl, whether it's one Naziris, so we know for sure he was Makabal Naziris. The question is, how is this Naziris going to end? There, Rabbi Yehuda holds the person does get himself into such a suffix. There would be a huge difference in the length of the term. There would be a huge difference, but that's not a concern for Rabbi Yehuda. Well, we go l'chumer. That's the whole part. We go l'chumer. Just like in Reb Shimon we go l'chumer, so too in Reb Yehuda go l'chumer. Reb Yehuda only says a person avoids suffix when he's beginning in his ears. But if we know for sure he was makabel naziris, there's no question here. This fellow was makabel naziris. In the case of a fellow son of only a nazir, if this kriya has 100 kur, well then the question is, was he makabel naziris or not? But here in our Mishnah we know for sure he was makabel naziris. The question is how he wants it to end. Rabbi Yehuda holds a person would get into such a suffix. So without you have such a suffix of when it's going to end, that's a suffix that Rabbi Yehuda does get into. Because if he holds like Rebbe, only then is it a question of when it's going to end. If he held like the Tanakama, it would be a whole series of small sets of Naziris. So then Rabbi Yehuda's shita still applies, because the first Naziris, yes, of 30 days he was Makabal, but the second Naziris he wouldn't have been Makabal anymore, because it's initiating in his ears. So Zok to Gemara, how could you possibly say that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rebbe? Mi savalok Rebbe. But nan we learned in our Mishnah, Hareini Nazir Kemini Nemoisa Chama, the end of our Mishnah. And what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said that he has to keep a whole series, 30 years worth of 30 days of Naziris. And what did Rabbi Yehuda say? Rabbi Yehuda brought a story to confirm the Tanakama's halacha. Am Rabbi Yehuda, Maisa Hoya, the Chivin Sheshlim Meis. So if you're going to hold that Rabbi Yehuda holds that there's multiple Nizirois over here, well then he's bringing a nice raya to the Tanakama. Hanu timer the Kivin the Hishlim Meis. It makes sense. It's a good raya to the Tanakama because there were multiple Naziris here, and he died after the multiple Naziris. If Rabbi Yehuda learns that when someone says it's one Naziris, which is how Rabbi would understand it, how is there any type of raya to the Tanakama's halacha that there's a series of multiple Naziris? So it must be that Rabbi Yehuda does not hold like Rabbi. He must hold like the Rabbanon. If he holds like the Rabbanon, then Rabbi Yehuda cannot be like our Mishnah, because now it's a question of initiating new Naziris, and Rabbi Yehuda holds a person doesn't do that, misafik. And I'll bring you another raya that Rabbi Yehuda does not hold like Rabbi. Mi savar like Rabbi. Could Rabbi Yehuda hold like Rabbi? But Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda said, if someone says Hareini Nazir Minyan, remember I told you Minyan is a hybrid. Hareini Nazir Minyan Hilkati kits, which they used to pile up the figs in piles, and there were piles as far as the eye can see. It was like an unlimited. Or Uminyan Shivle Shvile Shemitah. Most Rishonim have learned Shvile Shemitah means the rows on a Shemitah year. And when you control your field, you have a controlled rows where you walk, and you don't walk, of course, where you're trying to grow things. But Shemitah, it's a hefkerveld. So wherever people walk is another path. So there's an unlimited amount of paths in Shemitah. The halach is Moine Nizirois, Kiminin Hilkti Kayitz, Uchamin Shibal Shemitah, which means it's an unlimited series of 30-day operation. So you see clearly that Rabbi Yehuda holds, not like Rabbi, that it's one big Naziris. He learned that it's multiple Naziris. So how could Rabbi Yehuda still with the Reisa? The Gemara Minyan Shiny. You're right. If you just said Hareini Nazir, Hareini Nazir Hilkati, there he would agree with Rabbi. But Minyan is different. And there even Rabbi would agree. In fact, the Gemara, Shiny like the Rabbi Minyan. Does Rabbi look at saying Minyan different? Just as if you said Harei Alai Nizi Rice, does Rabbi look at Minyan just as if he would look at Harei Alai Nizi Rice? But Tanya we learned Hareini Nazir Keminyan Yemoisachama, Moini Naziris Keminyan Yemoisachama, Kimei Alavana, Moini Kimei Alavana. But Rabbi argued, Rabbi Omer Atzi Omer Nizi Rice Alai Keminyan Yemoisachama Ucheminyan Yemoisalavana. So Rabbi holds that Minyan doesn't mean anything. You have to dafik Harei Alai Nizi Rice. So how could you say that Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi when Rabbi Yehuda holds that Minyan would work? Rabbi Yehuda holds that if you didn't say Minyan, if you just said Hareini Nazir, that's one big Naziris. That's where he agrees with Rabbi. And therefore, he would stem in our Mishnah. But he argues by the word Minyan. That one Naziris Kibbutz Aliyah. Rabbi Yehuda holds if he uses the word minyan, that means multiples. Rabbi holds the only way a person means he wants multiple naziris if he said Harei Alai Niziros. Okay, Zok Gemara Vayter, easy Gemara. Tell me about Hareini Nazir Kol Yemei Chayai. If someone says I'm a Nazir hold this in my life, Hareini Nazir Olam, we had this case. Harei's a Nazir Olam, then he's a Nazir Olam. But what if he said Afilu Me'eshon Afilu Elav Shanim? So that's already an amount of time that he knows that it's clear to him. Which means it's like a regular Naziris, which means he cannot lighten up, he can't trim from time to time. A Nazir Olam is like Avshalom who could trim from time to time. A Nazir Olam is a regular Nazir, except his period of Naziris lasts a very long time, no trimming, no breaks. Tana Rabban, Hareini Nazir ve'achas. What if he said, I'm a Nazir ve'achas? Moinashtayim. That would be two Naziris. What if he said, Hareini Nazir ve'achas ve'oid? Then minus shalish, that's three naziris. What if he's already nazir the achas v'oid v'shuv min arba? Then he has four naziris. Shita it's pashut. That's more no. When he said v'shuv, maybe v'shuv means v'shuv double up on what I did up until this point, and it should be six. Ki chulu v'avaloshis kamashal on the loy. V'shuv is just adding one more naziris. Tanurabanan hareini nazir, and then he added to it a suffix. So if he added the word hein, Hareini Nazir hein, it means achas, he wants one naziris. If he said Hareini Nazir digun, it means he wanted two naziris. Time. What if he said Hareini Nazir trigun? That means three naziris. Hareini Nazir tatragun, that means four naziris. Hareini Nazir pentagon, chamesh. The chiddush is that these are Greek words, and you see that a Kabbalist naziris in Greek works. Taner Rabbanan, Bayis Ogel. What if you have a round house? Digun, a house with only 2 corners. Trigun, a house with 3 corners. Pontigoin, a house with 5 corners. Einoi Metama Binagoin. Because the only type of house that's Metama Binagoin is a house with 4 corners. Tetragon, if it has 4 corners, Metama Binagoin will be Metama Binagoin. My timer. Lematahu oimer kir kirois, lemalahu oimer kir kirois. Hare kanarba. It says twice in the pasuk of Nedarim of Nega, v'hine pasuk Nega b'kirois abayis. Why does it say kirois? It's a Nega in a wall. Why did the pasuk mention kirois? It just should have said it spread b'kir abayis. So the fact that the Torah twice uses the word b'kirois when it really should use the word b'kir, one over here and one over here. Since the Torah uses kirais twice instead of kir, it tells us that there needs to be 4 walls. Kari harei kanarba, you need 4 walls and therefore 4 corners. Hadran Allah, kol kinuye, hadran Allah, kol kinuye, hadran Allah, kol kinuye.